Hello, we're with Dr. Craig Carter again today, theologian and research professor of theology at Tyndale University in Toronto. And today we're going to talk about the recent rise in anti Semitism in the world, most of all in the United States, been so recent and kind of apathetic almost. Craig, if you could speak to that briefly about that, I would appreciate it.
Well, anti-Semitism is a long-standing thing, and I think we should define it a little bit. There are three kinds of anti-Semitism, in my opinion. There's been a lot of research on this by historians in the last 75 years, and a lot of debate and discussion about what it is, where it comes from, what causes it, how to recognize it, and all those kinds of questions. I think that stepping back and looking at the big picture, I think you can distinguish three kinds of anti Semitism. First of all, there's what I would call natural ethnic group rivalry anti Semitism. Whenever you have two groups of people living in the same space, there's often competition. And so the Greeks and the Turks, the tribes in Africa, everywhere you go around the globe. I was raised in New Brunswick. So in New Brunswick, it's the English speaking people against the Acadians. But the English speaking people are made up of Scotch, Irish, and English. If you go to Ireland, it's the Irish against the English. So it depends on the situation and the history of the local place, and it's normal. I mean, normal it's not good, it's not right, it's not nice, but it is common, put it that way, for there to be intergroup rivalry, and so you would expect to see that, and it's not exactly earth shattering. It's just the way fallen humans interact on this planet. The ethnic groups are rivals, and they develop dislike for each other, and they use slurs about each other, and they criticize each other, and so on and so forth. Jewish people get caught up in that just like everybody else. So there's what you could call normal ethnic rivalry anti-Semitism, and then secondly, there's a kind of anti-Semitism that is common because the Jewish people are 4,000 years old as a race. Abraham was the first Jew. There are very few groups of people that have maintained any kind of cultural ethnic identity over a long period of time like that. You have the Greeks, maybe the Egyptians, but the list is very short. So the
Right.
Jewish people have existed for a long time, and they have thrived for a long time in many different circumstances, under very adverse circumstances. They've been dispossessed of their homeland between 70 AD and 1948. That's a long time for a ethnic group to continue to exist without its own homeland. Um, and they've been very successful so there are more Jewish Nobel Prize winners per capita, more Jewish doctors, scientists, engineers, more Jewish holders of patents, scientific patents, than per capita than any other group. So there is a kind of a an envy of the Jewish people, especially on the part of any dispossessed or group or people who feel inadequate or like failures. In other words, there's what we could call loser anti-Semitism. It's basically a kind of resentment against successful people,
Right.
and and a desire to reach up and tear down it's the sort of human emotion that the Bolsheviks played on in the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. The resentment against the upper class nobility and the people that had money, on the part of people who were at the lower end of society, just kind of is saying to them, you have a right to hate these people because they're more successful than you. And that's why you should join our revolution. So there's a lot of that. There are a lot of people who are just anti-Jewish people because they are successful and they have survived, and they resent them, and they hate them. So that's two kinds. The third kind of anti-Semitism is what I would call spiritual warfare anti-Semitism. There is a strong element of um, hating the Jewish people for introducing God and the Ten Commandments into our society. You will hear people online saying that they're against the Judeo-Christian ethos of the West. Why? Because the Jews don't deserve to be lumped in with the Christians as progenitors of our Western civilization. The Jews are evil and bad, and we want to reject them. But the truth is that Christianity emerges out of Judaism, and Christianity does not reject the Old Testament. We had that debate in the second century. The Gnostic teacher Marcion came to Rome and wanted to get rid of the Old Testament, claimed that the Old Testament God was an inferior God. The New Testament God's a God of love. The Old Testament God's a God of wrath. And he wanted to get rid of the Old Testament, and he wanted to turn Christianity into a religion that was not only post-Jewish, but anti-Jewish. And the church said, no, we're not doing that. The Old Testament is our Bible. We see ourselves as grafted onto the tree of Israel. We see ourselves as part of the same story that God has been working out all through the Old Testament, culminating in the Jewish Messiah, Jesus, who we believe in. And so the church has rejected this, but it keeps coming back. There is almost a demonic hatred of the Jews by people who really, it's not really that they hate the Jews. Behind their hatred of the Jews is a hatred of God, the God of the Jews, the God of the Old Testament, the God of the law, the God who says, no, adultery is wrong. And there are a lot of people who will even confess that the reason that they don't believe in God and the reason that they're not Christians is because God cramps their lifestyle. To believe in God would mean they have to stop sinning, and they don't want to stop sinning.
Right.
And so they resent the idea that society as a whole supports the God who says thou shalt not do this and this and this.
Yeah.
Therefore, who is responsible for introducing that God who cramps my lifestyle? It's the
The
Jews.
Jews. Yeah.
And I think that behind that or manipulating that are spiritual forces, demonic forces, Satan himself, who appeals to people to reject God. And one of the ways he gets them to reject God without saying so in so many words is to hate the Jews. So the Jews are almost like a proxy for God. They become almost collateral damage in the sense that the war is against God, but they're in the way. And I think that spiritually, I would say that some instances of anti-Semitism in the world belong to that first level, that's just normal inter-ethnic group rivalry. There are some people who say things that are anti-Semitic, and they're wrong and they're bad, but they're really not that serious. It's not that big a deal. It's just the same way the Irish talk about the English and the English talk about the Irish, and one tribe in Africa talks about the other. It doesn't necessarily lead to rape and murder and genocide. It's just an intergroup rivalry. So there's some of that. And there's also some anti-Jewish sentiment on the part of people who are just basically compensating for their own inadequacies and their own failures in life. And they hate the successful. They hate the rich. They hate those who seem to have it together. They hate those who survive. So there's that. But I think that behind those manifestations, there is, if those two were all that existed, it wouldn't be that dangerous for the Jews. Um, but there is another level to it that is spiritual and theological, and it's very big and very serious. Most people don't know that the Arabs in the Muslim Brotherhood, that is after the fall of the Caliphate in World War I, the Ottoman Empire ended. There's no more Islamic Caliphate. A group developed in the 20s and 30s called the Muslim Brotherhood. They developed in Egypt. They spread all over the place. Their ideology is to restore the caliphate and for Islam to conquer the world. And out of this ideology comes Al Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and a whole list of other groups. And basically, they absorbed Nazi propaganda during the 1930s, and they reconceived of their own Islamic religion and reread the Quranic texts in such a way as to make the Jews the chief villain of history. And so whereas the Nazis had a race-based anti-Semitism, the Arabs who were influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood developed a religious-based anti-Semitism. And this religious-based anti-Semitism focuses on one set of Quranic texts as opposed to another, namely the later texts that after the Jews had rejected Muhammad, he said some very evil and bad things about them, and they focus on those, and they think that Israel is the enemy. Now, but actually, Israel is just the closest enemy. The nation of Israel is right in the middle of uh, the Middle Eastern area that has been conquered by Arab Muslim conquerors over the centuries.
Mhm.
And it's the last little bit of
Yeah,
non-Muslim
yeah,
controlled territory in that whole region. So they're focused on trying to destroy Israel. But the same war, the same ideological problem that they have with Israel, they have with the West, they have with Christians. And Islam has been trying to conquer the West since the seventh, eighth century, and they are they are as much opposed to Christians as they are to Jews. It's a religious motivation. It's a fanatical, religious, political, violent um, attitude that they take toward the Jews, and this goes way beyond normal interethnic group rivalry or loser resentment. This is something that drives and motivates entire societies, as you see in the Islamic Republic of Iran. They are teetering on the brink of collapse. They have murdered 30,000 of their own people to
yeah.
hold on to power. And why? They are determined to destroy Israel no matter what happens to them. They are apocalyptic, visionary, religious fanatics. And they're not doing what is rational in terms of realistic geopolitical strategy. They're not ensuring the survival of their government. They are risking utter destruction because they're driven by this religious zeal to destroy the Jews, and it's going to destroy them. What I'm saying is that's dangerous. That is an ideology that affects everybody in the world. We're all endangered by that ideology, and we have to understand that anti-Semitism is not just something that is dangerous for Jews. It is dangerous for the world because today it may be the Jews, but if they destroyed Israel, if God forbid the nation of Israel was wiped off the map and all the Jews were subjected to a second Holocaust, and so that the 7 million Jews in Israel were destroyed, if you think for one moment that Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis in Iran would stop at that and say, now the job is finished, it's all
Right.
over, we can just live peacefully now
Yeah.
forever. That is absolutely naive. That is an ahistorical understanding. That is ignoring 14 centuries of Islamic history.
Yeah.
That would not happen. The war would then be, the frontier would then be the the Western Mediterranean. It would be Greece. It would be Italy. It would be Spain. It would be conquering Western Europe, and ultimately North America. So that's what anti-Semitism is, and so we can't. Uh, Anti-Semitism should be a concern to everybody, and particularly it should be a concern to people in the West who understand the true nature of Islam and its history and its desire to conquer the world, especially in certain forms, such as the one that the Shiite form that rules Iran at the moment. That's especially bad. But the Sunnis are also bad. I mean,
Mm.
Qatar, um, Turkey, many of these nations are driven by leaders who and ruling elites that are extremely imbued with an anti-Israel. It's not just anti-Israel, anti-West. It is a desire to see the Islamic Empire spread over the entire earth, and there will never be peace until everyone is conquered by Islam in that ideology. So it's something that affects us all.
So, what do you think about the West response to Islam in the form of Islamophobia?
Well, I don't believe there is such a thing as Islamophobia. I believe that's a nonsense concept.
And,
Islamophobia, a
yeah,
phobia is an irrational fear.
right,
There is nothing irrational about fearing Islam.
right.
Islam is dangerous. Read the history books. Islam is imperialistic, colonialist, bent on conquest. It is some have described Islam as a political ideology which also has a religion. When people think about Islam as a religion in the same way that Judaism is a religion, or Christianity is a religion, or Hinduism is a religion, or Sikhism is a religion, it's not in the same category as those other things.
Right.
All those other things are religions that are focused on the spiritual aspect of life, and they are willing to live within a society that has a government structure separate from those religions. So Catholicism used to be more devoted to a unity of state and church, but it has learned to exist as a religion in a society that is not governed by a Catholic government under the Pope, but is a separate civil government. Islam has never been able to do that. There has never been an example yet in history of a society where Islam has become near majority or a majority, where Islam has not tried to impose Islamic government on the society as a whole. Like, there are people in the West who are so naive and know nothing about history. They do not know that Egypt was a Christian nation at one point. They don't know that. They look at Egypt, they think that's Islamic, or Lebanon, that's Islamic, or Iran, that's Islamic. Well, these countries have been conquered by Islam. And so if from the point of view of Islam, they conquered Spain, they were driven back out of Spain, they want to reconquer it again. And so the idea that it's just a religion like the other religions is naive.
So when people like Nick Fuentes recently on Piers Morgan said, um, you know, my generation is just done with the pearl clutching. Those are his words. And he went on to say and that was 80 years ago, as if it's not important anymore. Um, how would you respond to that?
Well, Nick Fuentes does not speak for a generation.
Right.
And Nick Fuentes is a agitator and a destroyer and a nihilist. And Nick Fuentes is not saying anything new. He's not saying anything that Friedrich Nietzsche didn't say better 150 years ago.
Right.
So the thing is that Nick Fuentes has no governing ideology. He has no philosophy. He has no system of society. He has no religion. He claims to be a Christian. He is not. He is an absolute pagan heretic.
Right.
Now, the thing is, if you gave Nick Fuentes absolute power over all of North America tomorrow,
Right.
he would have no idea of what to do, of how to rule a society. He has no interest in that. He has an interest in self-promotion, making money, scandal, and entertaining people by scandalizing them and by promoting his nihilistic vision. So we need to understand that in the West today, the 20th century, the history of the 20th century shows us that there have been two major ideologies that have been nihilistic. One is communism and the other is fascism. And today there are a lot of people trying to convince us that these are the only two options going forward. These are the only two viable options for the world. That the and it's presented as fascism is right wing and communism is left wing. But actually, it's like a horseshoe. Communism and fascism are like the ends of the horseshoe. Liberal democratic society is in the middle of the horseshoe. And the point is that no matter which, the two ends of the horseshoe keep bending until they meet. And so there's not really anything different about the Jacobins of the French Revolution, the Bolsheviks of the Russian Revolution, the fascists of Nazi Germany and Italy, and the people like Nick Fuentes today. All of them are people who say The West has failed. The center will not hold. We've got to go to one of these extremes and use violence to tear down the existing order and reshape it. And it doesn't really matter which one of these ideologies you jump on board with. They all lead to the same destination. They all lead to a nation in ruins. They all lead to death and genocide, murder, destruction, bombing, and failure. They all lead to Berlin 1945. They all lead to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1979. Russia has been devastated by communism. It's still not recovered from communism. The highest rate of alcoholism in the world, a lower life expectancy than Western countries. Its population is crashing. Russia and China also. China is in demographic freefall, losing 400,000 people a year. It's going to get old before it gets rich. It's imploding because of the one-child policy. All of these ideologies, whether they're supposedly left or right, communist, fascist, they're all the same. They're all the same in the sense that they all are nihilistic. They all tear down. They're all motivated by this lie. This central lie is, look, the world is so terrible that if we just tear down the existing structure, if we destroy the government, overthrow the government, destroy society, break all the social norms, use bad words on podcasts and just scandalize everybody, if we just disrupt all the morality, the mores, the structure, the way that people interact, tear it all down, whatever emerges from the rubble is bound to be better. That's the lie. And that's the lie the Bolsheviks sold, the Nazis sold, and that's the lie that's being peddled by people like Fuentes today. It appeals to people who are losers. It appeals to people who feel inadequate, people who feel hard done by, people who feel that life has treated them harshly, people who think that the world has not arranged itself satisfactorily for me. I'm unemployed. I don't have a girlfriend. I don't have any money. It must be someone else's fault. It must be the Jews. It must be and maybe it's the Jews because they're communists. Or no, it's the Jews because they're capitalists. Well, whatever they are, they become the scapegoat for my inadequacies, my failures, my sadness, my feeling of isolation. And people like Fuentes appeal to broken, discouraged, worn down people, and they sell them this lie that because your experience of life is so bad, that means that the whole society that we live in is so evil that we must tear it down. And if we do, then something better will emerge. And it's comforting to think that the problem is not me. It's not because I'm an alcoholic drug user. It's not because can't get along with my neighbor. It's not because I failed at something or other. It's somebody else's fault. It's the system's fault. It's the society's fault. It's the educational. It's the politician's fault. It's the Jews' fault. It's somebody's fault. As long as it's not my fault, that's comforting. And so Fuentes has an audience of people like that.
Sure.
And that's where anti-Semitism gets used to advance a nihilistic agenda, because it's a flight from responsibility. It's a refusal to grow up and take responsibility for your own life. It's a conspiracy theory that you use to blame other people for your problems. That's why it's so appealing to people. That's why it appeals to people. It appeals to the worst instincts that we all have. And if we let it, it will lead us to destruction. It will lead us to societal destruction. And you look at the Arab world today, the Arab world that has been dominated by this anti-Semitic hate for the Jews. What has it gained them? I mean, I've traveled in the Middle East, and it has not gained them anything. You look at Iran. Their currency is in free fall. Inflation is out of control. People can't live normal lives because even though it's a rich country sitting on the second largest oil reserves in the world, it should be fabulously rich. It should be as rich as Saudi Arabia and Qatar and UAE, but it's not. People can't get food on the table because the whole society is crumbling. Why? Because of this fanatical obsession on the part of the leadership to attack the Jews as the source of all evil in the world, and the devotion of resources to a nuclear program that should have been spent on water projects and economic projects and infrastructure and transportation and development of their natural resources and selling them. Instead, it's destroying their society. So, yeah, this is a spiritual battle in the sense that when people are deceived by anti-Semitism, their attention is fixated on something other than what it needs to be fixed on in order to actually solve the problems of the world.
So it's important. I'd love Nick to see this interview. He won't, but I'd love him to see it. I can get him together with you. But I know that Nick is a Holocaust denier, pretty much. He says it's not important, whatever. And your own daughter, Rebecca, works at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Now, I have looked over their website. It is extensive. You can take virtual tours, audio tours, sorry, at the site itself, and they have meetings that you can meet with Holocaust survivors. And if you could tell us a little bit about Rebecca and her work there, I'd really appreciate that.
Well, Rebecca did a PhD at the University of Toronto under Doris Bergen in 20th century Jewish studies and history, and she works on she's written a book, and actually the book is her doctoral dissertation. It's taken a few years, but it's finally just been published by the University of Wisconsin Press, and it's won an award for best first book in history.
Wow.
Uh, and it's on the Salvation Army in Germany during the Nazi period, during the 1930s, and it deals with questions like, um, why was the Salvation Army able to keep functioning under the Nazis? How did they navigate the situation where they were obviously, as a Christian organization, um, under pressure? And how much did they conform and accommodate and compromise in order to stay open? And were they right to focus on helping people, in physical need with issues of hunger and all that, or should they have been more outspoken in opposing the Nazi policies and all those kinds of questions? So it's a very interesting case study on a small scale of a very large problem and set of questions that applies in many different historical times and places. She works as a researcher. So the museum is not just a museum; it's also a research institute,
Okay.
and it sort of has it has two main functions. One is research, one is dissemination of research and education of the public. So the museum part is an educational endeavor, but they also have programs for public school teachers and university professors. They put on week-long seminars in the summer, and they bring these people in groups, small groups of 10 to 15, and they have speakers and they have readings and they have discussions about the Holocaust. And uh, it helps them. If you, for instance, were a grade 12 history teacher, or if you were a lecturer at a Christian college or a secular college, and you wanted to do a course, introduce a course on 20th century Germany or the Holocaust or some such topic,
All right.
then you could go to one of these seminars and get the up to date um, reading lists and bibliographies and research results and hear the speakers and get educated on basically the history of that period. So that's part of her work. So she also is involved in editing books and going to scholarly conferences and networking with other academics and uh, promoting Holocaust studies. Another thing she's doing is that she's on a very interesting committee, which is looking at um, the Vatican archives of the early and mid 20th century period. You
No.
know that the Vatican has its diplomatic archives that are closed for 50 years they're open, like many countries have archives that are closed for a period of time and then opened after a period of time to historical researchers. So the Nazi period, what was the role of the popes during the 1930s and 40s vis-a-vis the Nazis? There's been a lot of controversy in this, and books written about it, and the church has been accused of being too soft on the Nazis and so on and so forth. And all these accusations have swirled, and books have been written, and theses have been promoted, and debate has taken place. As the archives open up, more and more researchers are able to go in and do their doctoral dissertation in this area and write books about using resources that had not been previously accessible.
Mm.
She's on a committee that is digitizing these archival materials, and they will be made available at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem and the Holocaust Museum in the United States, so that people will be able to um, use those resources without actually going to the Vatican. So that's another long-term, expensive, detailed, painstaking, highly political negotiation project that takes a lot of diplomatic skill and a lot of academic skill and takes a lot of time and has to be funded. And so that whole project, there's a committee that she serves on. So she travels to Israel fairly regularly and travels to Germany quite regularly and is involved in not only the conference part of presenting papers and that sort of thing, but also the the uh, uh, the funding and the negotiation and the work of this archival work in terms of what one story about related to that. She was actually had just arrived in Rome on October 7th, 2022, when it all happened, and the conference was scholars from the Vatican and the Washington Museum and Israel were supposed to be meeting to discuss this project at a conference in in Rome, and the people from Israel didn't get there because of what happened, the war breaking out, and some of the people who were from North America, who Rebecca knew, were Jewish themselves,
Right.
and so they spent the first day after basically uh, finding out what was going on, being devastated by it, and then eventually the conference was canceled and they came back home after a couple of days. So the, these things have a way of hitting home when you're personally involved with people who are personally, you
Yeah.
know, these Jewish people involved in this conference. Some of them had family in Israel at the time, at the moment, and would spent that Saturday trying to establish contact with family members, not knowing where they were, what was going on, or what was going to happen. That was a very tense day. Uh, if on October 8th, if Iran had launched its entire arsenal of ballistic missiles, and Hezbollah had launched its entire arsenal at that point, and the plan that Hezbollah had of invading Galilee from the north had been carried out, if the West Bank uprising that was planned by elements in the West Bank, if all of those things had happened at the same time as Hamas had launched its attack from the south, Israel would have been in a very, very precarious position at that point. And why the other three elements, why Hezbollah and Iran did not attack at the same time as Hamas, is really to this day not really known. I
Hmm.
mean, it's not. We don't really understand why they didn't do it.
So
Um,
that was the plan.
there was a plan, and Israel found the some of the plans in tunnels in Gaza as they went through the war.
Really?
The plan was to do it, but um, it seems that once again, the key to Israelite survival, and you can read stories about this literally in the Bible, but just I'm but the key to Israel's survival seems to have been the jealousy and rivalry and lack of cooperation among her Arab foes. That seems to have been why they didn't act as one. This has happened several times in all the wars of the 20th century. But for some reason, they didn't. And you can go back to the book of Samuel, and you can read stories about um, how Edom was preparing to attack Israel and ended up fighting among themselves and things like that, where you see, sure, from a secular perspective, you can say, well, this is just coincidence. This is um, groups that can't get along, leaders fighting with each other. Yes, but you can also, and many Jews do, you can also read it as divine intervention, basically scattering the Lord, causing Israel's enemies to fight among themselves so that they cannot present a united front and overwhelm the Jewish people. Um, I People who I know in Israel who do not come across as particularly religious. These are not Orthodox Hasidic Jews, with the pigtails and the black hats and the coats, and who are hyper religious, the ultra Orthodox. Not people like that, just ordinary people who they get married and buried in Judaism. They are consider themselves Jewish. They believe in God, but they don't go to synagogue much, and they're not really keeping kosher all that much. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Those ordinary citizens of Israel, many of them do believe that the providential hand of the Lord is on them, and they interpret these events as the Lord saving them, which I find very fascinating, very interesting. And as a Christian who studies church history, most of the people in Christian history, from the Puritans to the Reformers to missionaries to all kinds of people, view the world in the same way. They see God's providential hand at work in the historical events of the world, advancing his cause and preserving his people and getting done what he wants to see get done. So I don't find that to be a especially crazy view of the world at all.
Well, as you were mentioning that, I was thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, but about the Six-Day War, if I'm not wrong, being a place where it ended so quickly, and um, the facts that yeah, like I said, I haven't read about it in a long time, but that it was really um, baffling how it ended, and the um, the overwhelming approach towards Israel that kind of faded away almost.
Yeah, well, the 1948 war was probably the most uh, unlikely victory by any people in the 20th century. The fact that Israel was not wiped out in 1948 after being invaded by five Arab countries, they were undersupplied. They did not have armaments. They did not have an air force. They didn't have heavy artillery. It was amazing that they survived at all. And I think people like me will say God's hand was on Israel and that's why it survived. And that in itself triggers and provokes a reaction from certain other people. Other people hear that, and it makes them hate the Jews all the more because they have this warped idea that, well, the Jews are somehow God's special people. And if they're the special people, then I'm not the special people. So I hate them. I resent them for being the special people. But that's not a Christian attitude, because as Christians, we consider ourselves to be guests in the house of Israel. We consider ourselves Gentiles who have been grafted into Israel. We're not the original Israel, but we are Israel. They're our people, and we're all one people. So we don't feel like God has rejected us and favored them. We feel that through Israel has come the Messiah and the gospel and the prophets and the scriptures and joy and hope and peace and the gospel for the entire world. So we don't resent them. We see them as instruments in the hand of God, and we're thankful for them. We wish that every one of them would believe in Jesus and accept him as the Messiah, but we don't think of them as somehow our rivals or as something that replaces us, and we don't replace them. We're just we both have a role in the salvation history of God. So yeah, I think that anti-Semitism is something we should be concerned about. It's something uh, that we should recognize as antithetical to the gospel and to Christianity, and it is something that we should be not naive about in terms of its effect on our lives, on the West. I mean, I cannot believe the degree to which the Muslim immigration into the Western world has resulted in such a huge amount of, you see the marches, hundreds of thousands of people in London and New York, and all this anti Semitic fervor being expressed in the last 2 years has had an effect on the minds of people, in ordinary people in the West. It's had several effects. One effect is that the anti-Semites are crawling out from under the rocks where they used to stay hidden. They used to not dare to poke their head up, but now they do because they feel like there's other people saying the same thing as them, so they feel emboldened. It's also affected people in that people are afraid to stand up and speak for Israel where they used to do so, but now they're afraid to do so because they're afraid that they're going to get criticized.
Right.
I think also you see an effect in terms of our government policy. You know, Jews are less than 1% of Canadian population. Muslims are now up to 5% and growing fast. They control a large number of, or not a large number, but a significant number of federal seats in parliament are controlled now by the Muslim vote. So you see political parties bending to them and cooperating, compromising with them, and not criticizing their excesses. And in trying to cozy up to the Muslims, what they're doing is enabling anti-Semitism. They didn't start out to enable anti-Semitism. That wasn't the goal, but it's the result. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of effects of the last 2.5 years. Have Things have really dramatically changed in Western Europe and North America in terms of the widespread social acceptance of anti-Semitism. And that partly explains why people, crazy people like Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes are getting audiences. They're surfing a wave that is not of their creation, but they're basically using this increased social openness to anti-Semitism to come out into the light, and they try to sound radical and trying to sound like they're the only truth seekers and they're willing to say the things that other people aren't willing to say and all that. And it's a pose. It's a posture that they adopt, and it's effective from a propaganda point of view. The propaganda against Israel has been unbelievable. I
Yeah.
mean, we in 2 years we've gone from, and by the way, the Samiduan organization in Vancouver, the anti-Semitic pro-Hamas organization, was demonstrating on October 8th against Israeli genocide. October 8th, that's before Israel even went into Gaza. And why would they? And so the whole thing from then on was genocide was attempted against Israel, and Israel was blamed for a genocide it did not commit.
Right.
And in that situation, it's what we call moral inversion. It's where you call good evil and evil good. It's like what happens at the end of Romans 1 after Paul goes through the whole from 18 to 31. It's all about the decline of the Gentile world into uh, starting out with not recognizing God as God, not being thankful to God as creator, and then moving into sexual perversion, and then a whole list of sins down lower in the chapter. And then the final endpoint is where they actually call good evil and evil good. They in moral inversion, and that's what we're seeing in our society today. We're actually seeing a situation where the Nazis are persecuting the Jews, and the Jews are accused of being Nazis. This is it doesn't get any more anti-truth and anti-logic than that, but it is where we are, and the propaganda is effective, and there's a certain number of people who can be frightened and intimidated into saying things they know are not true if there's enough social pressure applied to them. And those people are flowing over to the pro anti Semitism side very quickly as we speak.
Well, that's been very insightful, Craig, and I appreciate the time today, your wealth of knowledge. You're introducing us to Rebecca's work as well at the museum, and also your analysis of Nick and Candace as well. So, again, Craig, I want to say thank you, and we hopefully can do a little bit more together later on. But as for today, we're going to have to wrap it up. Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot. Great to talk to you.
Likewise. All right. Thanks, Craig.